The days of cooler weather, cloudy skies, and colored leaves has arrived, and in this video I'll be showing you the process of creating my next wooden block painting collection inspired by the autumn season. I sketched out my plans beforehand, as I always do. This collection will be much smaller than spring's, with only 6 blocks instead of 10. I decided on a smaller collection since I could get them done faster, as I'm on a bit of a deadline with these, but I quite like having smaller collections, and I'll keep to that moving forward. We're starting off with what I thought would be the easiest block to do. I sometimes find starting a project to be the hardest part about it, and often am a victim of ADHD procrastination tendencies, and so I find starting with the easiest piece or the simplest part is the best way to get the ball rolling and get into a space where I'm motivated and eager to do the rest. This block is going to be the reflection of a puddle. A person with an umbrella is reflected in the water, surrounded by fallen autumn leaves. I started off by painting the blue-toned gray that makes up most of the piece, and then started to fill in the silhouette. The bricks that make up the ground are going to be seen within the reflection, so I got to jotting in the basic look of those. That was all I got done for that day, and picked it up again a few days later. Yeah. The next step was the detail work of the bricks, adding in the lights and the darks and making the grout look realistic. It's a lot of just smashing light and dark shades of brown and black into the block until my brush starts begging me to have mercy, which I don't provide because we have a job to get done. Then it's what I'm going to be calling the flick and tap stage. I flick shades of white, brown, gray, and orange onto the piece, tap it out with my fingers to soften the spots, and repeat. I stop every now and again to fix the grout that gets kind of lost during this process, and then I repeat the flick and tap process again. I do this for what feels like forever until I have something that looks like a realistic brick, and finish it off with a few large dots and such that are added in by hand, touch up the shading a little bit, and voila. The flick and tap method must have worn me out or something, because I didn't touch this piece again for a few days, but now we're back at it to do the leaves. Because a lot of my paints are rather transparent and don't go over dark base colors very well, I'll start by making the leaves white, so I'm not using like 100 layers of paint to make them opaque. Once I've got those on there, it's time to add color. The large leaf at the bottom is the intended focal point here, so although I'm including some of the same colors in other leaves to tie them all together, I am making it mostly a different color than the rest to help it stand out. I spent more than one day working on these leaves, but I got frustrated with them and felt like I wasn't inspired to work on it at all, so I set it aside and moved on to the next piece. It's important to take a break from pieces I'm not inspired by or I'm getting frustrated with, because otherwise I get burnt out and don't paint for weeks or sometimes months on end, and that really sucks. The block we're moving on to is a pumpkin patch featuring a cat perched on an old fence. I figured this one could be done in a more impressionist style, with the details a little more loosely thrown in, so I underestimated the difficulty just a tad when going in. As always, I started off with the base colors, added in the fencing and such for the foreground, and then worked my way from the background to the foreground when adding the details. Trees are hard. The more imperfect your trees are, the more realistic they look. So having the branches more squiggly rather than straight makes a huge difference. I think these two trees just might be some of the best I've ever painted, honestly. And I've painted a lot of trees over the years. Next up is the pumpkin patch. Aside from the pumpkins themselves, there's a lot of grass and weeds and vines and such in there too. So that looser painting style was going to be best for this, because otherwise I'd be breaking my upper back painting it super detailed for hours on end. After painting in a few layers of color for the pumpkins and setting it aside to dry, I began working on the trick or treat ghost block, painting in the base colors to prep it for tomorrow. By this point, Halloween was over, so I suppose there was no sense in this one. But there are people out there that love Halloween and its aesthetic all year round, so this one's for them. I typically try to avoid painting scenes that are too specific to certain times of the year, like holidays, but I made an exception for this piece because the idea was just too cute to pass up. I used a few reference images for this one, mostly for the angle of the perspective of the person looking down at the trick-or-treaters, the boy and his dog, and a few examples of iron fences, but otherwise I was freehanding this one and just kind of going with the flow. The perspective of a lot of the items, like the sidewalk, the pole, the sewer grate, and the fence, for example, may be a bit off as a result, but I'm actually super happy with how it turned out, all things considered. I've never been great at freehand and have built my skills through recreation of images or things that I see in front of me. I painted portraits and such a lot in my teens, so although I'm fantastic at recreating by hand pictures and things that I see, I'm admittedly not great at doing things by memory or picturing something in my mind and recreating it that way. Mad respect to those who can do it well, for real, but up until now, that's just not a skill I've ever honed. It used to be something I was rather ashamed of, but I realize now that not every artist can recreate things by hand the way that I can, and that's a valuable ability on its own. So it's something I feel I can now be proud of. This piece was a little different for me in that respect, but it left me feeling pretty accomplished that it looked as nice as it did. I think I was also able to get through it much faster, as I wasn't trying to get most of it to look too much like a reference image. I didn't have anything to compare most of my work to, so I could find that good enough place a little bit quicker. I painted for at least 4 hours and got the block about 45% done before I called it a day. With that block mostly done, I returned to the pumpkin patch. I didn't show some of the extra work I did the day before as I hadn't filmed it, but I basically got the pumpkins mostly done and some of the dirt and leaf details thrown on there. I'm picking up from there and adding in the red and golden brown weed things that are all over the pumpkin patch, which were a lot of fun to just kind of like jot in there. I then added in the vines. The photo I'm using as reference is quite blurry, so I can't tell if that's what they are, but I made the assumption and went with it. I added in a lot of extra long grass and greenery to my painting so that it felt a little more colorful and full, and then got to painting in the fence. I found getting the right angle for the fence wood really tough. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know why. So I have this method where I take my brush handle and I line it up with the thing I'm trying to paint to see if it matches up with the painting that's directly next to it. And then I follow the line created by the thing I'm trying to paint to get the right angle. Does that make sense? I hope that description paired with seeing me do it helps it make sense. You could also use a ruler for this too, as it's much straighter and maybe more accurate, but my brush is usually what I have on hand, quite literally, and is sufficient at the task, so I don't need it to be exact anyway. I painted in the milk container and the cat, and it was complete. I wish I would have shown more of the cat process, but it's super hard to paint tiny details and film at the same time, since I have to like lean in real close and my head gets in the way of the camera. This day's goal was to complete the abandoned puddle painting. I started by adding in some of the ripples and water details and adding in a dark wash over some of the leaves to give the illusion that they're underwater. I then moved on to covering up the extra splattered paint and accidentally changed the color of the sky reflection to a more gray tone than the previous bluish one, but rolled with it anyway because I can't spend 20 minutes color testing until I have an exact match to the original color. While that dries, I started the base colors for the next 2 blocks, the window scene and the bike leaning up against the lamppost. Returning to the puddle, I started to add in the water ripples. Sometimes it's hard for even me to see how everything will come together while painting a piece, but while adding in the ripples, I slowly started to see it begin to look more and more like a puddle reflection. This process is one of my favorite aspects of painting because there's so many times where I've gone into a piece not knowing how the heck I'm gonna get that texture right or make that thing look how it's supposed to, like reflections in windows or shiny objects or the texture of water, for example. When I finally see something I'm creating begin to look how it's meant to, it's such a wonderful feeling. I felt that way while working on this one, as I went into it today worried the ripples wouldn't look right and people might not know what it was supposed to be. I felt pretty confident by the end of it that it was easy to tell on first glance what it was. To finish up today's session, I painted in the base colors for the final block a stowaway cat in the back of a pumpkin farmer's pickup truck. I decided to make this cat black as I feel they really represent the autumn season and its tight connection to Halloween. I returned to the other 2 blocks to add in some of the background details as well, but I wasn't able to complete any of them by the time my session completed for the day. I decided the next block to be completed would be the bike and lamppost. Like the trick-or-treaters, it's another one that is less based on references, so I figured it would be easier to finish in the same way the trick-or-treater one was. I started out by smashing various shades of brown and orange into the background until it formed something that looked like trees. I worked a little bit on the window block while that dried, adding in some cows and greenery. I took some time here to sign the pieces I've finished so far. I touched up on some areas that needed retouching with black paint, but then I realized I might as well paint a proper second coat so it's all even and looks more polished. So I did that before signing the backs of them once that dried. I always include the date, month and year, my artist signature, and my name in the bottom left corner, as I'm not famous enough to have my signature instantly recognizable. Yep, that was all I filmed that day. I basically got the window to a near finished state that day, so today's session is starting with me finishing off the edges with a second coat of black before moving on to the bike painting I was hoping to complete today. We're back to the hell that is the flick and tape brick method. But with tinier bricks this time, which means adding the grout back in every few rounds was a lot more tedious. Because the bricks are further away from the viewer's eyes, I'll be able to get away with the lines not being so crisp and the bricks too detailed, since from far away you can't see grout anyway. This still took an hour of my time, if not more, though. When adding in the lamppost, I was worried it would get lost amongst the mostly dark background, but the light highlights really helped it stand out well. I unfortunately filmed a lot of this process from an awful angle because I often forget how my hand gets in the way of being able to see what I'm doing when filming from the right side, so I'm taking this into consideration and I will be more careful of the angles I'm filming at for future videos. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the background is quite dark, so I'm starting the bike off with white paint so I don't have to layer too much later on. I wasn't sure what color to make the bike. Yellow or red are too close to orange, so I considered purple but felt like that might be an odd choice. I ended up painting it a light orange as a placeholder. and I actually didn't mind the monochrome look. I did change the color the next day to blue after my grandmother recommended it. I hadn't even considered blue, but I thought that that looked nice. I loved the light brown details on the yellow bike I was using for reference, so I decided to add that into mine so that the bike has a little something extra going on than just blue and white. I then decided to lighten the blue color to help create more contrast between the bike and the background, but lightened it with a nude skin tone instead of white, so as to subdue the color a little bit and make it a more muted tone of blue. I added in the final touches on the lamppost and the flower basket, and the piece was complete. That brings us to the final full day of this project. These pieces were due for the next day, so I was stressing about getting this last one at least 90% done during this day's session. Painting the truck was the hardest part. I hate painting vehicles. The paint on them is just stupidly hard to get right for some reason, and the pumpkins were the second hardest. I love the ones that have the larger bumps to them, but the smoother the pumpkin is, the harder it is to make it look like a pumpkin. I finished the pumpkins, the crates they're in, and the truck, and then moved on to our sneaky little stowaway here. I spent a lot of time painting and repainting the face until I got it right, but I didn't film the process of that, or most of this block actually, as I was just so in the zone that I kept forgetting to film. The final day, I spent the morning adding the final touches to the last block. The highlights, the shadows, finishing the windshield, and adding the tiny whiskers to our kitty friend here. Having already painted the second coat of black on each of them, I signed our final 3 pieces, front and back, to finish them off. I'm just wondering whether I should name them or not. I normally don't. When I used to put my paintings in the gallery, when I did larger paintings, the owner used to make me name them. At the time I didn't understand the importance of it, but I think it was because then she could log the name of the painting a lot easier. When I dropped off the spring collection back in it must have been July, when several of those blocks sold back in September, she was noting down which ones sold, but she didn't have names for them, so she was just writing it down based on what they looked like the one with the bike or the one with the field of flowers, the tulips, or something like that. I realized that the reason why she likes having names on things, like pieces having names, is more for her own records, to be able to write down what is sold that month so that she can tally everything up and pay the artist the right amount, especially when they sell several things. I just don't care to name my pieces. I don't know, it just doesn't feel necessary. So I'm just wondering if maybe the solution is to just number them at the back, so then she can write down the numbers. Like I'll put AC for autumn collection and then put the number on the back. I'll be taking them to the gallery today, so after taking pictures, I wrapped them in a bit of parchment to prevent them from touching, as the paint tends to stick together and pulling them apart is not easy and can lead to the paint coming off. With them heading off to the gallery today, that brings me to the end of this little block collection. I'll be doing more art-based videos like this one of more block collections and other painting projects, so look forward to those in the coming weeks.